Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Clarke, Martin Luther King famously said that he had a dream of the day when his children would be known by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, Senator.
Well, maybe there's a misprint, but I'm sure you can clear it up for me. Dating back to your days when in school, when you seemed to argue that African Americans were genetically superior to Caucasians. Is that correct?
No, Senator. That I believe you're referring to an op-ed that I wrote at the age of 19 about the bell curve theory, a racist book that equated DNA with genetics and race. As a Black student at Harvard that time, we took grave offense to this book. It was co-authored by a Harvard professor. We did a number of events to speak out against the book, and this op-ed opened with a satirical reference to the statement that you just noted. Contemporaneous reporting by the campus paper made very clear that this was not a view that I espoused. What I was seeking to do was to hold up a mirror and put one racist theory alongside another to challenge people as to why we were unwilling to wholly reject the racist theory that defined the bell curve book.
So this was satire?
Absolutely, Senator.
And where was that published?
In the student paper, the Harvard Crimson, and there's contemporaneous reporting from that time, from that day, that makes clear that these were not views that I espouse, Senator.
Do you agree with the proposition that we ought to make it easy for people who are entitled to vote and hard to make it hard for people who are not legally qualified to vote to vote?
I believe, Senator, that we want to ensure that eligible Americans are able to have voice in democracy.
You mean you don't have to register? If you're not registered but eligible, you should still be able to vote?
No, absolutely, Senator. We want to make it easy for people to register,
right,
easy for people to vote, and we want to ensure that only eligible people are able to vote.
Do you believe there's such a thing as voter fraud?
I do. I don't see that. I, as somebody who has worked on these issues very closely, don't encounter voter fraud very often, but it does exist, and I know that the criminal division of the Justice Department exists to handle those matters if and when they were to arise.
Do you believe that for every illegal vote cast in an election, it dilutes and undermines the vote of legitimate voters?
I believe that vote fraud is exceedingly rare, but yes.
How do you know that?
We very rarely hear about vote fraud in our country. I run a nonpartisan hotline, the Election Protection Hotline at the Lawyers Committee. We get thousands of calls from people who are having challenges registering, challenges voting, and very rarely, if ever, get complaints regarding fraud.
The last time I was on the ballot in Texas before 2020, there were 4.8 million people to vote. That's 2014. This last year, we had about 11 million people vote, more than double. Do you believe that the votes of people of color were suppressed?
In the state of Texas, I know that there was some litigation to address some of the barriers that people faced during the pandemic. I think those numbers reflect an encouraging picture at the end of the day that reflect the results of advocacy, litigation, and other efforts to make it easier for people to vote amid the deadly pandemic.
Well, in Texas, we had mail-in ballots for people 65 and older, those who are disabled, those who were unable to show up in person on Election Day. We had a full 3 weeks of early voting in person, and people were then able to vote on Election Day. Does that indicate to you that there was any systematic effort to deny minorities an opportunity to vote?
So, Senator, I can recall very vividly reports of long lines that stretched till 2, 3 a.m. During the early part of the pandemic in the primary season. I know that there were some long lines during the early voting period. I think there's still work to do, but I certainly think that those numbers are encouraging and reflect progress in the state of Texas when it comes to accessing the ballot amid the pandemic.
And finally, do you still advocate defunding the police?
I do not advocate defunding the police.
Do you advocate
Senator.
diverting some of the current funding for police for other purposes?
Well, you may be referencing an op-ed that Chairman Grassley referenced, and I don't have the power of the purse, didn't have the power of the purse behind me, so I talked about a way to allocate a limited budget of resources in a way that can ensure that police are able to do their jobs more effectively and ensure community safety. I'm pleased and excited that President Biden has committed $300 million new dollars to cops, and that we're now in a world in which we're working with more resources to tackle these problems.